I'm Clara. Not that the name means anything to you yet, but it did once mean something to my parents, or rather, what they wanted it to mean. They wanted it to mean classic, successful, and traditional. 2 years ago, I deleted their numbers and blocked them on every social media platform imaginable. I did it right after listening to my own father, Robert Henderson, an investment banker whose worth was measured solely in quarter-end bonuses. Call me a failure. Failure. The word hits different when it's delivered by the people who are supposed to be your biggest cheerleaders. But to understand why that word was the breaking point, you have to rewind. You have to understand the perfect, brittle ecosystem of Lake Forest, Illinois, where I grew up. Lake Forest isn't just a wealthy suburb north of Chicago. It's a living tableau of aspiration. Our two-story colonial, with its perfectly manicured lawn and three-car garage, wasn't a home. It was a statement. It was a testament to the values my parents cherished: status, flawless appearance, and financial ascendancy. My father, Robert, worked 60-hour weeks, fueled by ambition and the cold logic of Wall Street returns. My mother, Carol, was the quintessential socialite, managing the family's image like a precious stock portfolio. Charity galas, country club luncheons, and the eternal, exhausting pursuit of being seen as having it all. In this gilded cage, my older brother, Ethan, was the golden child. He was 3 years my senior, destined to inherit the family name and, more importantly, the family financial trajectory. The difference in how my parents treated us was never shouted. It was whispered in the details, a subtle, constant imbalance that shapes a person from the inside out. When Ethan, at 8, showed a fleeting interest in baseball, my father immediately hired a private coach and installed a professional batting cage in our pristine backyard. It was an investment, a measurable commitment to a sport with clear metrics of success. The trophies piled high on the mantel, glittering under the recessed lighting, tangible proof of Ethan's real talent, as my father would proudly tell anyone who visited. My passion emerged at the same age, but it involved dirt, not diamond dust. I discovered the primal, silent satisfaction of growing things. I started a small vegetable garden near the back fence, fascinated by the alchemy of seed and soil. The reaction from my parents was starkly different. My mother complained about the constant dirt trails leading from the garden shed to the kitchen, fretting that it ruined the aesthetic of her hand-tiled floors. My father simply laughed it off. "Clara's just playing in the mud," he'd say, waving a dismissive hand. It wasn't a hobby, it was an inconvenience. It was worthless play. Ethan's trophies were on display for the world. My science fair ribbons for projects on composting, soil health, and rudimentary vertical gardening concepts remained tucked away in a dusty desk drawer. I'd have to specifically ask why they weren't displayed, only to be met with a blank look and a quick, "They're safe there, darling. They're just school projects." The message was clear long before the word failure was ever spoken. Certain types of success truly mattered, and mine wasn't one of them. The pattern solidified through middle school and high school. When Ethan made the honor roll, it was a celebratory trip to a Chicago Bulls game, courtside seats naturally. When I achieved the exact same academic status, the reaction was a brief nod over the breakfast table. That's the baseline, Clara. That's what we expect. Excellence in school was required, but only Ethan's achievements earned celebration. Birthdays and holidays became a cruel visual metaphor for our diverging worth. For his 16th birthday, Ethan received a brand new cherry red sports car, complete with an enormous silver bow sitting on the hood in the driveway. It was loud. It was flashy. It was celebrated. For my 16th, I received a reliable, sensible, and thoroughly used sedan. My father's justification was delivered with a patronizing tone. You just need something practical to get around, Clara. The irony was, I didn't care about the car itself. It wasn't the monetary value that stung, although the difference was undeniable. It was the lack of thought, the absence of excitement, and the clinical, obligatory nature of my gift versus the unrestrained, prideful celebration that accompanied every gift for Ethan. His path was paved with gold and glory. Mine was paved with quiet, lonely practicality. But every story, even one about abandonment, needs an ally. And mine came in the form of my grandmother. She was the one crack in the veneer of Henderson perfection, the one person who saw the dirt on my hands and recognized the potential it held. Grandma Clara. She was the exception that kept me sane in a family obsessed with the superficial, and her quiet wisdom would eventually become the foundation of everything I built. I just didn't know yet that her guidance was the only real inheritance I would ever receive. I just knew that if I was going to survive in a world where my parents saw me as perpetually playing in the mud, I needed her and I needed the soil. And the cold, sharp truth was, I was about to lose the only anchor I had. Grandma Clara was my sanctuary. She wasn't part of the lake forest tableau. She represented the rough-hewn, honest roots my father, Robert, had worked so tirelessly to bury. She had grown up on a working farm in rural southern Illinois before moving to the suburbs with my grandfather. While my parents chased the ephemeral validation of status, Clara understood the eternal validation that came from the earth. Her house was modest, cozy, and perfectly lived in, the antithesis of my Mother Carol's showcase home. But it was her garden that drew me in like a powerful, silent magnet. It was less a garden and more a magnificent, rambling ecosystem, bursting with heirloom tomatoes, fragrant herbs, and the noisy, constant hum of bees. It was chaotic, beautiful, and profoundly honest. There was no pretense in Alara's garden, much like there was no pretense in her quiet gaze. Not everyone measures success with a $sign, Clara, she would tell me, sitting on her worn porch swing, the air thick with the scent of mint and sun-baked soil. Some of us measure it by how much good we put back into the earth. Those words, spoken in her gentle, weathered voice, were the antidote to the constant stream of financial rhetoric I heard at home. She didn't dismiss my interest in plants. She recognized it as a genuine calling. While my father lectured Ethan on asset management and market capitalization, Clara taught me the magic of companion planting. The way certain plants thrive when placed near others, a lesson in synergy that extended far beyond the vegetable patch. She taught me about the patient, transformative power of composting, turning waste into nourishment, a subtle metaphor for turning disappointment into fuel. Our weekend visits were my classroom and my refuge. She gifted me rare seeds, not jewelry. She gave me specialty gardening tools, heavy and solid in my hands, not designer clothes. And she gave me books, volumes on sustainable agriculture, permaculture design, and innovative growing practices, texts I devoured during long, stifling summers while Ethan was away at elite sports camps or networking retreats. "You have a gift, Clara," she'd say, her hands, strong and spotted with age, guiding mine as we transplanted delicate seedlings. Her touch was firm but tender. The world needs people who understand that we can't keep taking from the land without giving back. Your father lost his way chasing money. He started out here, you know. He knew the soil, but he chose the concrete. That was the deepest sadness in her eyes, the loss of her son to an ambition she viewed as shallow and destructive. She saw the same hunger for external validation in Carol, my mother, who worried more about the guest list for luncheon than the health of the planet her children would inherit. Clara was my shield against their world and my anchor to a deeper reality. In my junior year, I channeled everything Clara had taught me into a science project, a prototype for a vertical, hydroponic growing system designed for urban environments. It wasn't just scientifically sound. It was beautiful, a miniature, efficient ecosystem. It won regional recognition, earning me a feature story in a small, sustainable farming magazine and even a brief mention on local news. I remember my parents attending the award ceremony, seated stiffly in the back row. They wore expressions of detached obligation, looking profoundly uncomfortable when other parents congratulated them on my ingenuity. I saw my father, Robert, cornered by a colleague who mentioned seeing my picture in the newspaper. "It's just a school project," he said, too loudly, waving it away like a persistent fly. "Ethan is the one applying to Wharton next year. That's something with real potential." The casual cruelty of his words cut deep, a familiar, dull ache. But standing there, beside my thriving green invention, I gripped the wooden frame for strength. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had Alara's. She was the only audience that mattered, and her beaming smile from across the room was my true prize. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was choosing the right path, even if it was the loneliest one. Little did I know, my time with my anchor was rapidly running out, and the true test of my resolve was about to begin. The news came during the spring of my senior year, a sharp, unexpected crack in the carefully structured world I inhabited. Grandma Clara was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. It was swift, cruel, and definitive. The prognosis left no room for the kind of financial maneuverings my father excelled at. This was a problem money couldn't solve, and the helplessness brought seemed to deepen Robert's emotional withdrawal. I spent every available moment with her. The hospital room, sterile and cold, felt galaxies away from the warm chaos of her garden. Yet I tried to bring the garden to her. I'd bring small, fragrant sprigs of rosemary and lavender, placing them on her bedside table. I'd finished my college application essays in the visitor's chair, reading passages aloud to her, talking endlessly about my plans to major in environmental science, focusing on sustainable agriculture. These were the only conversations that felt real, a quiet tether to the future I hoped to build. One afternoon, just weeks before my high school graduation, she was lucid, her eyes clear despite the frailty that had consumed her body. She reached for my hand, her once strong gardening hands now papery thin and cool. Her voice was barely a whisper, forcing me to lean in close, absorbing every syllable as if it were a final, sacred instruction. "Promise me you'll follow your heart, Clara," she murmured, her gaze locking with mine. "Your father, he lost his way, chasing the metrics. He forgot what life is measured by. Don't make the same mistake. The world needs your kind of healing more than it needs another bank statement." The weight of that promise settled on me, heavy and precious. It wasn't just a promise to pursue my degree. It was a vow to live authentically, to prioritize purpose over profit, even if it meant alienation from my family. It was her last will and testament, delivered in the form of a plea. 3 weeks later, she was gone. The funeral was held in a large, echoing suburban church, precisely the kind of setting Clara had always avoided in life. The ceremony was respectful, but it felt stiff, performed for the benefit of my parents' social circle rather than a genuine honoring of her simple, profound spirit. It was in the reception line, just after the burial, that the final, most shocking piece of the puzzle fell into place. My father, standing stiffly in his tailored suit, was speaking to a distant relative. I was close enough to hear his voice, low and dismissive, as he offered his casual assessment of my future. Claire's going through a phase, all this environmental stuff. She'll come around eventually. She'll figure out that she needs to find something practical. He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound that was meant to convey his masculine financial authority. He was speaking about me, standing 10 feet away at his own mother's funeral, the woman who had dedicated her last breath to guiding me away from his value system. He wasn't just dismissing my career choice. He was dismissing the final, cherished connection I had to his mother. The pain was immediate, sharp, and purifying. It was a betrayal not just of me, but of Alara's memory. That night, alone in my silent bedroom, surrounded by brochures for the University of Illinois' renowned environmental science program, I didn't cry. I felt a cold, hard resolve. My father's words had killed any lingering desire for his approval. They had confirmed that, in his eyes, my passion was a juvenile distraction, a fleeting eccentricity that would eventually be stamped out by the practical reality of the Henderson success model. I took the promise I had made to Clara to follow my heart and hardened it into a silent, fierce oath. I would stay true to my passion, not just for myself, but to honor the woman who saw my potential when no one else did. I would build a life based on her metrics: impact, sustainability, and genuine value to the earth. The college acceptance letters arrived, marking the true divergence of our paths. Ethan was accepted into Northwestern's highly prestigious business program. My parents threw a lavish party, a proper fete, complete with their business associates and country club friends, all toasting his bright, lucrative future. When my acceptance to U of I for environmental science arrived, it was acknowledged with a brief, "That's nice, dear," over a rushed breakfast. No party, no toasts, just a return to the newspaper and the quiet understanding that the golden child was soaring, while the other was merely doing what was expected. The stage was now set for the financial inequality that would soon become unbearable. The celebration for Ethan's enrollment at Northwestern felt less like a party and more like a shareholders' meeting. My father, Robert, beamed as he introduced Ethan to every power broker in the room, laying out his son's future like a perfectly executed 5-year plan. The subtext was thick and inescapable. This is the return on investment we expect. My excitement for the University of Illinois' highly regarded sustainable agriculture research was met with immediate, polite derision. I remember trying to articulate the value of the program during that breakfast, right after their tepid, "That's nice, dear." "It's one of the top programs for sustainable agriculture," I explained, leaning forward, trying to inject some of my genuine enthusiasm into the stale Lake Forest air. "The research they're doing on regenerative farming techniques and low water systems is revolutionary. I could really make an impact." My father paused, lowering his Wall Street Journal. He glanced at my mother, Carol, before fixing me with a look of patronizing curiosity. "Environmental science," he repeated, letting the words hang in the air like a bad investment. "Clara, be serious. What exactly does one do with that degree?" "Save the rainforest." He finished with a short, cynical chuckle that made it clear he wasn't looking for a serious answer, only a confirmation of his own prejudice. I swallowed my hurt and delivered the rehearsed response, rooted in months of research. "Actually, there are growing, profitable opportunities in corporate sustainability consulting, environmental policy, and sustainable agriculture technology. The field is expanding rapidly as companies realize the measurable business value of sustainable, efficient practices." Robert exchanged a quick, meaningful look with Carol. If businesses are involved, he conceded, returning to his paper, perhaps there's a sliver of hope for you yet. The conditional approval stung. My purpose was only acceptable if it could be monetized and quantified on his terms. The true disparity became glaringly obvious in the financial arrangements. For Ethan, they covered everything. Full tuition at the prestigious private university, a sleek new apartment near campus in an affluent area, and a generous quarterly allowance. It was the cost of grooming the next generation of financial success. For me, they covered tuition and the most basic dormitory costs. Any extras were strictly my responsibility. Consider it a learning experience, Clara, my mother explained, her tone saccharine but firm. Ethan is pursuing a serious career path that will require extensive networking and connections. He needs the best image. Your interests are, well, more of a personal choice. You can manage on your own. The unspoken translation was brutal. Ethan's path was worth investment. Mine was not. Ethan's future was a priority. Mine was an afterthought. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I immediately found a job at the campus sustainability office, working 20 hours a week on top of a full course load. I balanced my time between studies, work, and the university's experimental agricultural plots, throwing myself into the physical labor and the research. While Ethan posted glossy social media updates from fraternity formals, exclusive networking events with industry leaders, and luxury vacations, I spent my college years elbow deep in soil and data logs, often exhausted but strangely fulfilled. I was learning the value of every dollar earned, every hour invested, and every calorie burned, a kind of value my parents' money could never buy. The heavy workload made me thrive academically. My commitment caught the eye of Professor Diana Williams, the department's leading researcher in urban agriculture. She was a powerhouse, brilliant, demanding, and utterly dismissive of pretense. Your vertical growing design shows real innovation, Clara, she told me after reviewing my freshman project. It's efficient. Have you considered the potential for scaling this for urban food deserts? For communities that lack access to fresh produce? Under her mentorship, the school project that my father had laughed at grew into a comprehensive system that maximized space while minimizing the one resource that mattered most in a changing climate: water. By my junior year, my design was robust enough to be implemented in a pilot program at a community garden near the U of I campus. It was a triumph of engineering and ethics. The university awarded the project a competitive $18,000 innovation grant. It was real money, earned by real work for real impact. But even this milestone was met with the familiar indifference back home. I shared the news during a weekend visit, bubbling with pride. "That's great, honey," my mother said absently, then immediately turned to Ethan. "Did you tell Clara about your summer internship offer from Goldman Sachs yet?" The rest of the dinner was devoted to Ethan's six-figure potential, the connections he was making, and the future corner office that awaited him. My grant-funded project, designed to address food insecurity in underserved communities, the direct legacy of Grandma Alera's values, was relegated to a footnote. I left that weekend with the taste of fulfillment already souring, knowing that the professional chasm between Ethan's path and mine was about to become the site of a profound, shattering family crisis. The years immediately following graduation only amplified the existing chasm. Ethan, with my father's strategic connections and his Northwestern degree, effortlessly landed a position at a prestigious financial firm in Chicago. His starting salary was a figure that made my mother, Carol, positively glow with pride as she shared the details with her golf club friends. He was living the script, fulfilling the prophecy of the Henderson name. I graduated with high honors, a dual specialization in sustainable agricultural systems, and a minor in business sustainability. The job market in my specific field was, as expected, challenging. After months of searching for the perfect fit, a role that truly utilized my specialization in innovative systems, I accepted an unpaid internship at Urban Harvest, a thriving, scrappy nonprofit focused on developing community gardens in Chicago's food deserts. The dinner where I announced this was legendary for its tension. An unpaid internship. At your age, Clara? My father's disappointment was a palpable, suffocating force. Ethan was earning six figures by the time he was 23. We sent you to a respected university for this. Dad, this is hands-on experience in exactly the field I want, I argued, trying to keep my voice steady. They're implementing cutting-edge, innovative growing systems in true urban environments. We're providing fresh produce where grocery access is limited. It's important work. Cutting-edge gardening, Robert muttered, rolling his scotch glass between his palms. Is this really the return we get on 4 years of college tuition, Clara? Is this the legacy you choose to build? My mother, ever the pragmatic diplomat, laid a manicured hand on my arm. Darling, have you considered an MBA? With your degree and some strong business credentials, you could consult for these companies. You would find opportunities with far better compensation. The subtext was loud and clear. Abandon your passion for something more lucrative. I politely but firmly declined. I was committed to the path Alara had encouraged, the path that felt honest. To escape the constant, stifling weight of their disapproval and the endless, suffocating updates about Ethan's latest bonus and his plans for a luxury condo, I moved out. I found a tiny, worn studio apartment in a less expensive area of the city, a long commute from my internship. The neighborhood wasn't Lake Forest, but the space was mine. It was free from the constant, subtle surveillance and the thinly veiled suggestions that I needed to reconsider my choices. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Carol had said during my move-out day, her voice edged with frustration. We only want what's best for you. I know, Mom, I replied, stacking my boxes. And in your own way, you do. But we fundamentally disagree about what best looks like. 3 years later, I had clawed my way up from unpaid intern to project manager at Urban Harvest. My salary was modest, requiring rigorous budgeting, but I found a profound, quiet fulfillment that money couldn't touch. Under my management, we had established 7 thriving community gardens in food deserts across the city. My innovative vertical growing systems were making a real, measurable difference, teaching residents sustainability and providing essential fresh food. I was even invited to speak at a regional urban agriculture conference, a significant professional honor. But these accomplishments remained largely unacknowledged by my family, whose only measure of success remained promotions, luxury assets, and salary increases. Family dinners, infrequent and tense, always circled back to my financial situation rather than the impact of my work. Ethan, meanwhile, continued his rapid ascent in finance. Each promotion, each hefty bonus, was celebrated with lavish gifts and proud announcements in their social circles. He was set to marry Amanda, the polished daughter of one of my father's friends, the perfect daughter-in-law for the Henderson name. The real turning point, the moment of absolute, crystalline clarity that would shatter our relationship forever, was Ethan's elaborate engagement dinner. I arrived early, genuinely happy for him, despite our divergent lives. The dining room was transformed. Fine china, crystal stemware, and a catered meal featuring all of Ethan's favorites. The house was soon filled with my parents' world, friends, business associates, Amanda's affluent family. I recognized no one from my world of community gardens and soil scientists. Dinner proceeded with toasts and effusive praise for Ethan's childhood achievements, his stellar career, and Amanda's perfect fit into the Henderson mold. Then my father, clearly emboldened by several glasses of expensive vintage wine, stood for the final, most anticipated toast. "Family is everything," Robert began, his voice thick with pride. "And nothing matters more than seeing your children succeed. Ethan has always made us proud, from his first steps to his last promotion." He raised his glass higher, his face flushed with triumph. "And now, as he prepares to start his own family, his mother and I want to help lay the foundation." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and removed a pristine white envelope. Amanda and Ethan's eyes widened with anticipation. Robert handed it over. Ethan opened it, pulled out a check, and passed it to Amanda, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide a look of delighted, shocked surprise. $280,000, my father announced to the appreciative murmurs of the guests. "A down payment for a house worthy of the family you'll build together." The table erupted in applause. I sat frozen, my champagne glass halfway to my lips, staring at the number. $280,000. More money than I would earn in several years, given freely, publicly, and proudly to my brother, who didn't even need it. Meanwhile, I was budgeting carefully just to make rent each month on my hard-earned project manager salary, doing work that actually mattered. The applause felt like a physical blow. I forced a smile and joined in, fighting back the rising tide of complicated, undeniable pain. This wasn't about jealousy. It was about the cold, hard, unassailable evidence of how utterly worthless my parents considered my life choices. I needed to escape. I slipped away to the kitchen, seeking the sterile silence of the butler's pantry, unaware that I was walking straight into the most painful confrontation of my life. The kitchen was a whirlwind of hired catering staff, a world away from the gilded celebration taking place in the dining room. I started stacking dessert plates, needing the mindless physical work to process the shock of the $280,000. It wasn't the money that was the problem, it was the statement. It was a financial validation of a life path, and it screamed that my path was invalid. I was halfway through a stack when I heard my parents enter the adjacent butler's pantry, separated from me only by a thin wall of cabinetry. They were completely unaware of my presence, and I should have announced myself, should have clinked a plate, should have cleared my throat. But the silence that followed the clink of ice in my father's Scotch glass held me captive. I instinctively knew the conversation wasn't finished. "A perfect evening, Robert," my mother, Carol, was saying, her voice soft with self-satisfaction. Everyone was so impressed with Ethan and Amanda. "They make such a handsome couple." "He's done everything right," Robert agreed, the ice clinking again. "The right school, the right career, the right girl. We couldn't ask for more." There was a pregnant pause. I held my breath, every muscle tense. "At least one of our children isn't a failure," my father continued, his voice dropping to a low, distinct register, yet still clearly audible. The words, delivered with a sigh of relief, hit me like a physical punch. The plate nearly slipped from my hand. Failure, the word I had feared, the insult I had internalized for years, was now being spoken openly, casually behind my back. After years of dismissal, hearing my father explicitly confirm what I had always suspected, that I was a source of shame, was a knife plunged straight into my heart. All that education, he scoffed, and Clara's playing with plants while living paycheck to paycheck in some godforsaken studio apartment. I don't understand where we went wrong with her. My mother offered a weak defense. She's still young, Robert. Maybe she'll come around eventually. I doubt it. She's as stubborn as my mother was. The insult was compounded. He was now linking my failure to his own mother, Clara, the only person who had ever truly seen me. He wasn't done. Speaking of which, I still think it was a mistake for Clara to encourage all that gardening nonsense. Put ideas in her head about saving the world instead of building a proper career. My heart hammered against my ribs. Not only was I a failure, but Alara's memory, her profound wisdom, was being blamed as the cause of my delinquency. This wasn't just about money. It was about the absolute annihilation of my value system. The cumulative weight of every slight, every unacknowledged achievement, every patronizing laugh, boiled over. I carefully set the plates down and stepped around the corner, into the doorway of the pantry. Robert and Carol startled, exchanging guilty glances that confirmed my worst fears. They were caught. Their faces, usually so composed and controlled, were momentarily stripped bare, revealing a raw mix of surprise and defensiveness. "Candy," my mother began, instantly plastering her social smile back on. "We were just coming to find you for the champagne toast to Ethan and Amanda's new home." "No, you weren't," I said quietly. My voice was surprisingly steady, cold with a clarity I hadn't known I possessed. "You were discussing what a failure I am. Don't worry. I heard you clearly." My father straightened, visibly switching into his defensive banker stance. "You misunderstood, Clara. We were merely expressing concern about your financial situation. As your parents, that's our right." "No, Dad. I understood perfectly. You gave Ethan $280,000 tonight because he followed your approved life plan. Meanwhile, I'm a failure because I chose work that matters to me over a bigger paycheck. That's the ledger you're keeping." I pointed toward the dining room. "My work helps people in food deserts access fresh produce. It teaches sustainability practices that matter for generations. Just because it doesn't come with a corner office and stock options does not make it worthless." Robert set down his glass, his expression hardening into pure, unadulterated disappointment. "This childish idealism has gone on long enough, Clara. You have a good education that could be applied to something worthwhile. Instead, you're wasting your potential on glorified gardening projects that will never provide real security." My anger finally surpassed my pain. "Why would you invest in my future?" I demanded, meeting his hard gaze, "when you've already chosen to believe I'm a failure?" The word hung there, confirming the truth. My mother's eyes widened slightly at Robert's bluntness, but she remained silent, offering no contradiction, no defense of her daughter. In that silence, I found my final resolute peace. "I see," I said, a strange, liberating calm washing over me. "Thank you for making your position so perfectly clear." I walked past them, back into the glittering dining room, gathered my purse and jacket, and quietly said my goodbyes to Ethan and Amanda, offering one last, genuine congratulation. Neither of my parents followed me. Neither tried to explain, apologize, or stop me. As I drove out of that affluent bubble and into the driving rain that mirrored my mood, I knew I was leaving more than just a house. I was leaving an entire definition of self that was destroying me. Until they could respect my choices, I would stop seeking their approval. I was done. The drive home that night was a blur of rain, headlights, and the single, echoing word, failure. But beneath the pain, something essential had shifted. The betrayal was so complete, so public, and so definitive that it had, paradoxically, set me free. The constant, exhausting need for my parents' approval, which I had unconsciously carried since childhood, was finally severed. It felt like shedding a lead weight I hadn't even realized I was dragging. I got back to my tiny, silent studio apartment, the rain drumming a mournful rhythm on the window pane. I didn't unpack or change out of my expensive, borrowed dinner dress. I sat on the edge of my bed and, with slow, deliberate movements, I performed the act of finality. I deleted Robert and Carol's contact information from my phone. I unfriended them on social media. Then I blocked their numbers. The finality of these actions brought a profound, agonizing mixture of pain and liberation. There was the grief of losing the idea of the family I thought I had, but also the unexpected relief of no longer measuring my worth through their permanently disappointed eyes. For the first time since Grandma Alera's death, I felt an internal sense of peace that wasn't conditional. The first few weeks were a brutal combination of emotional rawness and intense focus. The void left by the absence of family, even a family that didn't understand me, was undeniable. But I channeled that massive emotional energy into my work at Urban Harvest. My anger became fuel. My hurt became focus. I dove into refining my vertical growing system, the same prototype my father had dismissed as gardening nonsense. Years of testing and iteration had already refined the hydroponic setup significantly, but now I pushed it further. I needed to engineer perfection. My latest design achieved a remarkable 65% reduction in water usage compared to traditional systems, while drastically increasing yield in limited urban spaces. I was solving real-world problems with quantifiable, measurable results, metrics my father couldn't ignore, even if he never saw them. I knew the potential applications of this technology were much broader than the nonprofit's budget allowed. We had implemented the systems in 3 community gardens, but I saw applications for restaurants, grocery chains, even large-scale corporate sustainability initiatives. I just lacked the capital and the business framework to scale it. One particularly successful harvest day at our newest garden site, I ran into Professor Diana Williams, my former mentor from U of I. She was volunteering, examining my system with a keen professional eye. "Clara, this evolution is remarkable," she said, running her hand along one of the vertical towers, bursting with leafy greens. "You solved the water circulation issues we discussed years ago. This isn't just a pilot program anymore." I shared my dilemma. The technology was ready for commercial application, but nonprofit budgets were a ceiling I couldn't break through. Professor Williams listened, nodding thoughtfully. Then she gave me the crucial piece of advice that would change the trajectory of my life. "You need to meet Marcus Chen," she said, her voice dropping to a serious tone. "He runs an agricultural technology investment fund focused entirely on sustainability. This isn't charity for him, it's smart money. Your innovation is exactly what he's looking for." That introduction felt like the universe responding directly to my silent declaration of independence. Marcus visited the garden the following week, not as a philanthropist, but as a hard-nosed investor. He asked detailed, professional questions about water efficiency, nutrient delivery, and patent protection. He saw the dollar signs and the value, understanding that sustainability was the new frontier of profit. "Your technology has commercial potential far beyond community gardens," he explained 2 weeks later, inviting me to present a formal business plan. "With proper funding, you could develop systems for restaurant groups, grocery chains, even large residential complexes. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating. I, the girl whose father called her a failure, was about to become an entrepreneur. I worked nights and weekends developing the business plan for what would become Vertical Bloom, a company dedicated to efficient, space-saving growing systems for urban environments. Marcus's fund offered an initial seed investment of $90,000 in exchange for 18% equity, enough to secure a small workshop space and hire a part-time engineer to perfect the manufacturing process. It was a modest start, but it was mine, and it was the first time I was truly building something for myself, free from the constraints of Lake Forest's expectations. I took a leave of absence from Urban Harvest, promising to continue supporting them, and plunged into the relentless, demanding world of startup life. The ultimate act of self-validation had begun. The early days of Vertical Bloom were not glamorous. They were brutal, exhausting, and defined by the omnipresent scent of metal shavings, PVC piping, and desperation. I was working 80-hour weeks, splitting my time ruthlessly between refining the technical blueprint, managing rudimentary business operations, and making cold calls to secure our first commercial clients. For the first 3 months, I paid myself exactly nothing. I stretched my savings to the absolute breaking point, still living in that small studio apartment, surviving on instant noodles and pure adrenaline. There were moments of paralyzing doubt, usually at 3 a.m., the classic hour of the entrepreneur's panic. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of my father's dismissive face flashing behind my eyes. Was he right? Was I foolishly pursuing an idealistic dream while Ethan was cementing a real career with prestige and power? These doubts were particularly acute around holidays, when the forced absence of my biological family, however toxic they had been, left an undeniable, aching void. I had made my stand, but the cost was profound loneliness. But then I would visit the small workshop, now stocked with our first custom-designed molds and irrigation pumps. I would look at the sleek, modular prototype for the vertical tower, a design that used a fraction of the water of anything else on the market, and the doubt would recede. This work mattered. It was tangible. It was the legacy of Clara, manifested in steel and science. My first real breakthrough, the kind that changes a company's trajectory overnight, came 4 months into operations. A regional, mid-tier grocery chain, FreshLink, agreed to pilot my system. They didn't just want it in the back room. They wanted an entire in-house produce department where herbs, microgreens, and small vegetables would grow right before the customer's eyes. The marketing appeal was massive, the ultimate in ultra-local, zero-transportation produce. Coupled with the significant reduction in water usage and the elimination of chemical pesticides, it made a compelling, financially sound business case. The installation was a huge success. FreshLink made it the centerpiece of their grand reopening, and the local business news covered the story extensively. The coverage brought immediate attention to Vertical Bloom, generating inquiries from high-end farm-to-table restaurants and other independent grocers interested in the living produce aisle concept. 6 months after officially founding the company, I hired my first full-time employees. Layla, a brilliant mechanical engineer who helped perfect our proprietary irrigation system, and Ryan, a veteran horticulturalist who expanded the variety of plants our systems could sustainably support. We had a team, a workshop, and a growing waiting list. We were real. Occasionally, through distant relatives or mutual acquaintances, snippets of my family's life would reach me. Ethan and Amanda had purchased a stunning, luxury townhouse in Lincoln Park, funded, of course, by that enormous down payment. My father, Robert, had secured a major promotion. My mother, Carol, was still chairing her galas. Their lives continued exactly as planned, without any discernible ripple from my departure. I maintained my firm boundary, declining invitations to cousins' weddings and sending back the few mail attempts they made, explaining simply, "I will consider reconnecting when you can respect my choices and acknowledge the hurtful way you dismissed my work." "They miss you, Clara," my Aunt Susan told me during one awkward phone call, trying to mediate. "They talk about you more than you think." My answer was concise, painful, but true. They miss who they wanted me to be, Aunt Susan. They don't miss who I actually am. As Vertical Bloom completed its first year, we reached the milestone that stunned me. Profitability. It was modest, but the balance sheet was black, not red. We had systems installed in 8 commercial locations and a long queue of potential clients. I allowed myself one indulgence after years of severe frugality. I moved out of the tiny studio and into a charming one-bedroom apartment in a safer, quieter neighborhood. It wasn't the luxury Ethan enjoyed, but it was mine, earned by the sweat and conviction of a life I believed in. With the business stabilizing, I started saving aggressively toward my true, long-term dream, the dream birthed by Clara. I wanted land. I needed a working farm where I could test and refine growing systems not just for urban applications, but for innovations that could be applied to traditional agriculture to reduce resource usage on a large scale. I opened a separate savings account, labeled the Clara Farm Fund, directing 30% of my salary into it each month, along with every consulting fee I earned. The fund grew slowly, but it grew with purpose, the tangible representation of my quiet, persistent success. I was building my own legacy, 1 square foot of green space at a time. The real estate search was about to begin, and it would ultimately bring my life crashing back into the world I had so desperately tried to escape. By the end of Vertical Bloom's second year, the company had exploded. We had grown to 16 full-time employees, securing a larger production facility where Layla and her team manufactured our proprietary systems. Coverage in a national sustainability magazine brought us attention from massive commercial clients. A major hotel chain interested in building rooftop gardens and a large school district looking to implement educational growing systems across their campuses. Marcus Chen, my investor, was ecstatic, introducing me to venture capitalists interested in our series of funding round. My original 18% stake had diluted with the new investment, but the company's valuation had increased so dramatically that my net worth, on paper, was now rapidly approaching 7 figures. It was a fact that would have utterly stunned my parents had they known. Through it all, I maintained my boundaries. I was courteous but firm. I sent a generous gift, but declined the invitation to a distant cousin's wedding where my parents would be present. When Ethan left a worried voicemail on my work phone, the only number he had, about a minor health scare involving my mother, I responded with a brief, professional email expressing concern, but I held my distance. "They miss who they wanted me to be," I'd told Aunt Susan, and that truth still stood. I wasn't ready for conditional love or grudging respect. As the second anniversary of the pantry confrontation approached, the Clara Farm Fund had grown to a substantial down payment. It was time. I began working with a real estate agent specializing in agricultural properties, looking for a location within a reasonable commuting distance of the Chicago office, a spot that combined good soil, usable structures, and the potential for a living laboratory. I viewed a dozen properties, each one lacking something vital, too wet, too small, structures beyond repair. Then the agent called, his voice vibrating with professional excitement. "Clara, this is it. 45 acres just came on the market in McHenry County. It has an old 1920s farmhouse that needs work, but the bones are solid. There's a massive barn in decent condition, and it has perfect southern exposure for your test fields. The owner is motivated to sell quickly." The property sat at the absolute upper limit of my budget, requiring every cent of the Clara Farm Fund, plus a mortgage that would stretch my finances thin. But the moment I drove up the long, winding gravel driveway, the decision was made. I pulled over, cutting the engine, and stepped out into the quiet, vast space. The air smelled like rich soil and promise. The gently rolling fields offered exactly the conditions I needed for side-by-side comparative growing trials. The barn was enormous, ample space for equipment, manufacturing, and initial growing prototypes. And the farmhouse, though faded and filled with the ghosts of the past, was charming and solid. In that quiet moment, standing at the edge of the property, I felt the sharpest, most profound sense of vindication. This was not a luxury condo. This was not a trophy asset. This was the physical manifestation of my authentic self, the realization of the values Clara had instilled in me. I submitted an offer the same day. 60 days later, I became the owner of 45 acres of possibility. The day I received the keys, I walked to the center of the largest field. The late afternoon sun warmed my face, and I looked out over the land that was now unequivocally mine. In that instant, I felt Alara's presence more strongly than I had since her death, as if she were standing right beside me, a faint, approving smile on her lips, nodding at the seeds I was finally preparing to plant, both literally and figuratively. Over the next 6 months of evenings and weekends, with the tireless help of Layla, Ryan, and my close friends who had become my chosen family, I poured myself into the renovation. The farmhouse was transformed into a comfortable living space, respecting its historic character while adding the modern tech I needed. The barn became a state-of-the-art research workshop, and the first 5 acres of fields were meticulously plotted for comparative trials, documenting the differences in resource usage and yield between traditional methods and our sustainable approaches. Moving day was a community effort. As the sun set, my friends and I sat on the wide front porch, drinking beer and eating pizza, celebrating a milestone that was so much more than a change of address. To Clara, my friend Zoe toasted, raising her bottle, who knew exactly what she wanted and never gave up, even when the people who should have supported her the most couldn't see her vision. The words brought unexpected tears. It was an acknowledgement of both the achievement and the residual ache of family absence. I had built a new life, a successful one, but the empty space where my biological family should have stood remained a quiet sadness. The universe, as always, has a strange sense of timing. The very next day, as I was unpacking boxes in my new farmhouse kitchen, I heard the sound of a large, expensive engine pulling up the long gravel driveway. I assumed it was one of the contractors returning a tool, but when I stepped onto the porch, I froze. Parked in my driveway was the familiar luxury SUV I hadn't seen in 2 years. Ethan's vehicle. My brother, Ethan Henderson, and his wife Amanda were staring through the windshield, their faces a mixture of confusion and stunned surprise as they took in the sprawling, working farm and the renovated farmhouse behind me. The world I had escaped was literally standing on my doorstep, and the shock of confrontation was immediate. My heart hammered against the walls of my chest. 2 years of absolute, deliberate silence, and now Ethan, the golden child, the symbol of everything I had run from, was idling in my driveway. His car, sleek and expensive, looked profoundly out of place against the backdrop of the working barn and the newly turned soil. Ethan stepped out first, slow and tentative, his expression shifting from confusion to stunned amazement as his eyes absorbed the 45-acre property. He was dressed in tailored casual wear, looking every inch the successful financial executive. But here on the gravel drive, he seemed unsure of his footing. "Clara," he asked, his voice hesitant, almost a question. "Ethan," I acknowledged, keeping my own voice carefully neutral, a practiced defense mechanism. "This is unexpected." Amanda joined him, elegant and polished, looking ready for a boutique shopping trip, not a visit to a farm. We were driving back from my parents' place in Wisconsin and took the scenic route to avoid I-94 construction, Ethan explained, gesturing vaguely. I saw the vertical bloom sign at the end of the road, and I couldn't believe it. "Is this yours?" "All 45 acres." "Yes," I said simply. My single word was loaded with years of unacknowledged struggle and silent triumph. "It's beautiful, Clara," Amanda offered, sounding genuinely surprised. "The house is charming." An awkward, heavy silence fell between us. 2 years of zero contact had created a chasm wider than the physical distance separating us on the drive. Finally, I sighed, recognizing that ignoring them was not an option. This confrontation had been forced, and I would face it on my own territory, on my own terms. "Would you like to come in?" I asked, gesturing toward the porch. "I just made coffee." They followed me inside, their expensive shoes squeaking slightly on the newly restored hardwood floors. I gave them a quick, professional tour of the main floor, explaining the renovations, how we'd uncovered the original beams, how the space was now set up for a mix of living and business. "You did all this yourself?" Ethan asked, genuine curiosity replacing the initial shock in his voice as he examined the exposed beam ceiling. "With help from Layla and Ryan. The bones were good, but it needed vision and a lot of elbow grease." We settled at the kitchen table with coffee, the conversation stilted and cautious. Ethan reiterated the story of the detour. "I almost didn't turn in when I saw the sign," he admitted, looking down at his coffee cup. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "Not after." He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. "After what happened?" I finished for him, my tone level. "After you stood there and watched Dad call me a failure, and then accepted the reward for following his approved life plan? Yes, I should have been angry. But you're here now." Ethan nodded, slowly, painfully. "I've thought about reaching out so many times after that night. The things Dad said. I should have said something. I know that now." "I didn't know you had started your own company," he continued, changing the subject, unable to bear the emotional weight of his silence, "or that it was doing well enough for this." He gestured at the sweeping view of the fields through the window. "There's a lot you don't know about my life, Ethan. That was always part of the problem." He took a slow sip of coffee. "I know. Actually, I've been following Vertical Bloom's progress for the past year. The revelation surprised me. One of our clients invested in agricultural technology startups, and your name came up during a meeting. The presenter used your system as a case study for water efficiency. I couldn't believe it was my little sister they were talking about, this innovative CEO. You never reached out, I noted. I didn't know what to say, he admitted, his composure finally cracking. After standing by while Dad called you a failure, then accepting their money for our house. I was ashamed. My whole career, my success was built on their script. Your path was built on your own conviction. Amanda, sensing his struggle, touched his arm supportively. Ethan's been questioning a lot of things lately, Clara. His career path, the choices we've made. Ethan's expression confirmed her words. I'm good at my job, Clara, but I don't love it the way you obviously love what you're doing here. Every morning, I put on the suit and play the role Dad groomed me for. Lately, I've been wondering if I'm living his dream instead of mine. The admission was shocking. Ethan, the perfect son, the golden child, was experiencing his own crisis of purpose. What would you do instead? I finally asked, looking at my brother and seeing, for the first time, a human being instead of a symbol of my parents' bias. He shrugged, looking suddenly younger, stripped of his corporate armor. I don't know yet, but watching you build something meaningful on your own terms, without them, it's made me realize how much of my life I've outsourced to their expectations. After coffee, I offered the tour. We walked through the converted barn, past the proprietary systems being assembled, and out to the large, carefully plotted test fields. He asked thoughtful, genuine questions about water reclamation and crop rotation, not the dismissive queries Robert would have posed about revenue or market share. He was interested in the work, the impact. As we returned to the house, Ethan stopped at the edge of the vegetable garden, looking back over the expanse of my farm. He turned to face me, his eyes serious. Dad was wrong about you, Clara. So wrong. You're not a failure. You've built something incredible here. The words I had longed to hear from my father came, instead, from my brother, bringing an unexpected surge of emotion. Before I could respond, Ethan pulled out his phone. Dad needs to see this, he declared, his voice urgent, almost angry. He needs to understand what you've accomplished. The shock was immediate. The boundary I had fiercely guarded for 2 years was about to be breached in the most dramatic way possible. A flash of pure panic shot through me. Ethan, stop. I don't think that's a good idea. The boundaries I set 2 years ago still stand. But the phone was already ringing. Ethan, fueled by his own internal crisis and newfound respect, was beyond stopping. He put the call on speakerphone, his face set with conviction. The sound of the dialing tone was deafening in the still, late afternoon air. Robert Henderson answered on the third ring, his familiar, clipped voice immediately recognizable, sending a jolt through me after 2 years of complete, self-imposed silence. Ethan? Everything okay? Aren't you driving back from Amanda's parents' place? Ethan cut straight to the point, his voice intense and surprisingly forceful. Dad, you need to see what Clara has built. Right now. We happened to drive past her property. She owns 45 acres in McHenry County. She's built a successful company. She has employees and clients in multiple states. Everything you said about her, it was wrong. The silence on the other end of the line was the longest, most shocking silence I had ever heard from my father. Robert, the man who always had a prepared, articulate answer for everything, was speechless. You're with Clara, he finally managed, his voice stripped of its usual certainty. Yes, we happened to drive past her property. Dad, you and Mom need to come see this. You need to understand what she's doing out here. It's not playing in the mud. Ethan was practically shouting, venting 2 years of his own quiet guilt and discomfort with the family narrative. Another long pause. The air crackled with suppressed emotion and disbelief. Is she there? Can I speak with her? Robert asked, the question tentative, almost pleading. Ethan looked at me. My chest felt tight, my hands clenched. I wasn't ready for his voice, for the inevitable judgment or the attempt at conditional conversation. I shook my head, my eyes communicating a clear, firm no. She's not available right now, Ethan relayed, respecting my decision implicitly, a profound shift from the brother who once always prioritized our father's desires. But Dad, I'm serious. The things you said that night, you were wrong. Clara isn't wasting her potential. She's building something important, something that matters. I see, Robert said, his tone unreadable, neither defensive nor apologetic, just profoundly affected. Well, thank you for letting me know, son. Your mother and we will discuss this. He hung up without another word. Ethan turned to me, his shoulders slumping in a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I'm sorry if that was overstepping, Clara. I couldn't let him continue thinking you were struggling or failing when the reality is so completely different. He needed to hear it. I wasn't sure how to feel about Ethan's intervention. Part of me was grateful for his fierce defense, for his attempt to rewrite the family script. But another part, the part that had fiercely protected this independent life, felt vulnerable, exposed to the validation I no longer wanted or needed. It's done now, I said, finally, my gaze steady. But Ethan, you need to understand something important. I didn't build this to prove Dad wrong. I didn't build it to show that I could be successful on his terms. I built it because this work matters to me, because I believe in what we're creating. I know, he said quietly. That's what makes it even more impressive, Clara. You did it for the right reasons. As they prepared to leave, Ethan hesitated, looking nervous. Can we stay in touch? I've missed having a sister, and I'd like to know more about your work if you're willing to share it. The request was sincere, raw, and rooted in a desire for genuine connection, not just family obligation. Despite the complicated emotions his visit had stirred up, I nodded. I'd like that, Ethan. But you need to respect my boundaries with Mom and Dad. If we rebuild our relationship, it has to be separate from them for now. I understand, he assured me. This is between us. I watched their luxury SUV disappear down the driveway, leaving me standing alone on the porch of the farmhouse. The unexpected reconnection with Ethan had opened a door I had assumed would remain permanently closed, simultaneously reminding me of how far I had come without any outside validation. Whether Robert and Carol ever came to understand or value my choices remained uncertain. But standing there, looking out over the 45 acres of fields that represented my vision, I knew with certainty that I had chosen the right path for myself, regardless of their eventual judgment. The next act was not mine to write, it belonged to them. The week following Ethan's dramatic intervention passed in a blur of meetings, system installations, and the never-ending task of unpacking boxes in the farmhouse. I checked my phone frequently, expecting another call from Ethan, or perhaps even a cautious text from my mother, but the silence held. It was the calm before the storm, a silence that felt heavy with impending consequence. 7 days after Ethan's visit, the storm arrived. I pulled into the long driveway after a late meeting downtown and saw it immediately. A black Mercedes sedan parked discreetly beside my old pickup truck. My stomach tightened instantly. The license plate was unmistakable. Robert Henderson. 2 years of absolute separation, and now both my brother and my parents had appeared at my doorstep within a week. I sat in my truck for several minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I could drive away, avoiding the confrontation entirely. I could call and demand they leave. Or I could face it right here on my territory and on my terms. I took a deep breath, chose the third option, and walked toward the house where my parents stood awkwardly on the porch. My mother, Carol, looked older than I remembered, her perfectly maintained exterior showing subtle signs of strain. My father, Robert, stood beside her, stiff and unreadable, encased in his usual mask of professional composure. "Clara!" my mother said, her voice wavering slightly as I approached. "You look well. What are you doing here?" I asked directly, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his expensive tie. "Ethan told us about his visit, about your property and your business. We wanted to see for ourselves." 2 years of silence, and now you just show up unannounced. The hurt I had thought was processed resurfaced, sharp and unexpected. "We should have called first," my mother acknowledged, placing a hand on Robert's arm. "We weren't sure you would agree to see us." She wasn't wrong. Had they called, I would have declined. "Well, you're here now." I repeated the words I had used with Ethan. I unlocked the door, but didn't invite them in yet. "Why exactly did you come?" "For an update on the childish idealism you dismissed 2 years ago." Robert ignored the jab. "To see what you've built," he repeated, gesturing at the property. "Ethan was emphatic about us having the wrong impression of your situation." The careful wording was classic Robert, avoiding any direct admission of fault, yet acknowledging a profound misunderstanding. "Fine," I said, pushing open the door. "I'll show you around, and then we can talk." The tour was both vindicating and vulnerable. As we moved through the meticulously renovated farmhouse, Carol commented on the original features we had preserved and the tasteful updates. Her interior decorators, I noting the quality of the finish. "You've done a beautiful job, Clara. The space has so much character." Her approval felt genuine, if a little strange. Robert remained largely silent until we reached my home office. Framed press coverage of vertical bloom lined one wall. The national magazine feature, the regional business news, alongside technical drawings of our growing systems. "Your brother mentioned you had systems in 3 states," he said, studying the materials. "How many employees does your company have now?" 15 full-time, plus contractors for installations," I answered, watching his expression. His professional interest was finally engaged. He asked questions about scalability, supply chain management, and the protection of intellectual property, the language he understood. In the barn workshop, I explained our latest innovations in water reclamation and nutrient delivery. In the test fields, I showed them the meticulously documented comparative growing trials. We're comparing water usage, yield, and nutrient density between traditional methods and our modified approaches. The data helps refine our commercial systems and provides case studies for potential clients. By the time the tour was complete, the tension had shifted. It was no longer hostile. It was a heavy, uncomfortable anticipation. We settled at the kitchen table for the conversation I had dreaded and, in a strange way, needed. "Your operation here is impressive, Clara," Robert began, still sounding like a detached consultant. "Clearly more substantial than we understood." "That's because you never asked, Dad," I replied evenly. "You decided my work wasn't valuable because it didn't fit your definition of success. You refused to see the merit because you only applied conventional financial metrics." Carol placed her hand on Robert's arm, a gesture intended to soften him. "We were concerned about your financial security, Clara. We didn't understand that you were building something with such potential." The use of the word potential, rather than acknowledging the actual achievement, was still measuring me by future profit, not present value. My work had value even when I was making $28,000 a year at Urban Harvest, I said, my voice firm. The impact of what I do doesn't start and end with a balance sheet. Robert shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we focus too much on conventional measures of success, he conceded, the closest thing to an admission of error I had ever heard from him. I applied the same metrics to my children's choices without considering that different fields operate by different measures of value. Your work here, he gestured toward the 45 acres of fields, has metrics of its own. Sustainability improvements, resource conservation, innovations that address real problems. He met my eyes directly. I didn't have the right vocabulary to evaluate what you were building, so I dismissed it instead. That was short-sighted of me. My mother, her eyes fixed on her coffee cup, spoke next, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan told us what you overheard that night. That Robert called you a failure, and we didn't correct him. She looked up, her eyes wet. Those were his exact words, Clara, and we didn't correct him. That was wrong. The direct acknowledgement of the words that had driven me away, the raw, uncharacteristic honesty from my conflict-averse mother, caught me completely off guard. Yes, it was wrong, I agreed, unable to hide the decades of pain in my voice. It destroyed the foundation we were standing on. We've missed you, Clara, Carol said, voice breaking. Finding out from Ethan that you've built all this while we were completely absent from your life, it made us realize how much we lost through our own narrow thinking. We failed as parents when we drove you to cut contact. We wanted security for you, Robert said, his voice regaining some strength. The kind of security we provided for Ethan with the house down payment. The mention of the $280,000 gift that had been the final straw hung between us. If we were to try again, Robert asked, tentative and uncertain, what would that look like from your perspective? It would require real respect for my choices and my work, I said, looking from one parent to the other. Not just because the business is successful now, but because the work itself has value. And it would mean acknowledging the hurt caused by years of comparing me unfavorably to Ethan and dismissing my path as worthless. Robert nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. As they prepared to leave, Robert paused at the door, looking out at the sweeping landscape of my farm. He was silent for a long moment, then spoke a sentence that was perhaps the most healing gesture of the day. Your grandmother would be proud of what you've built here, Clara, he said unexpectedly. She always said you had a special connection to the land. I should have listened to her more carefully. The mention of Clara, the profound acknowledgement of her influence that he had spent decades dismissing, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I simply nodded, finally feeling a shift, a tentative opening in the hard wall that had stood between us for so long. The conversation hadn't provided a clean resolution, but it had begun a process of reassessment and potential healing, rooted in the enduring legacy of Grandma Clara. 6 months later, the landscape, both literal and emotional, had been profoundly transformed. Spring arrived in McHenry County, transforming the test fields into a vibrant, structured tapestry of experimental crops. The farm was now a living laboratory, the beating heart of vertical blooms research and development. My relationship with my family was similarly growing, cautious sprouts replacing the barren silence of the previous 2 years. Ethan and I had reestablished regular, easy contact. He visited the farm monthly, no longer just curious, but genuinely interested in the business, offering insights from his financial background. But now his advice was constructive, never patronizing. You know, helping me install this monitoring equipment, he said during one visit, wiping soil from his hands. I never expected to enjoy getting my hands dirty like this. Dad would have a heart attack, seeing his investment banker's son doing manual labor on a farm. The joke revealed how much Ethan himself was changing. He had recently reduced his work hours to 4 days a week, using the extra time to volunteer and explore interests long suppressed under the Henderson ambition. My relationship with Robert and Carol evolved more slowly, with conscious, careful steps. We had a monthly phone call, initially formal, but gradually becoming more natural. My mother visited the farm twice more, each time bringing a carefully chosen gift for the house, a peace offering in the language of homemaking she understood best. Robert remained reserved, but his efforts were visible. He began emailing me articles about agricultural technology or sustainability initiatives he encountered in his financial reading. It was his unique way of demonstrating that he was finally paying attention to a world he had once dismissed. The most significant test of our fragile new dynamic came with an invitation. I invited them all, Robert, Carol, Ethan, and Amanda, to dinner at the farmhouse. It was time for a family gathering on my territory, where I felt secure and confident. The evening arrived with a perfect early autumn breeze, carrying the scent of ripening apples from the orchard I was restoring. I prepared a meal featuring produce grown right on the farm, a tangible, delicious demonstration of the bounty created through sustainable methods. The conversation was easy, safe, focusing on neutral topics and light-hearted updates. As we moved to the porch for coffee after the meal, my mother placed a photo album on the table. "I've been going through old photographs, Clara," she explained, her voice soft. "I realized we have so few of your accomplishments compared to Ethan's. All those science fairs, the grants, we didn't fully document them." The album contained every photo she could find of my early environmental projects, school awards, and even recent press clippings about vertical bloom that she had collected without my knowledge. It was a sincere, belated attempt to rewrite the narrative of indifference. "Thank you, Mom," I said, recognizing the gesture as a profound act of love and repentance. As the evening progressed, Robert cleared his throat, signaling the moment of truth. "Clara, your mother and I have been discussing something we'd like to propose." My heart pounded slightly. "We've been reflecting on the disparity in how we supported you and Ethan financially. The house down payment that became a breaking point between us." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "We'd like to make an equivalent gift to you," Robert stated, his voice direct. $280,000, to use however you see fit, for the business, for the farm, or for yourself personally. It's a formal equalization. The offer hung in the air. 2 years ago, this financial validation would have meant everything. Now, having built a 7-figure company without it, the money held a different, almost hollow significance. "I appreciate the gesture, Dad," I said after a moment's quiet consideration. "But I don't need the money personally, and the business is doing well on its own merits. However," I continued, meeting his gaze, "I do have a suggestion for how that money could make a difference in a way that would be truly meaningful to me." I explained my idea: a scholarship fund for young women pursuing degrees in sustainable agriculture and environmental science, particularly those facing family pressure to choose more traditional, lucrative paths. "We could establish it in Grandma Alara's name," I suggested, bringing the humanistic focus home. Supporting students who, like me, see value in work that others might not immediately understand. The mention of Alara visibly moved Robert. "She would have liked that very much, Clara," he said quietly. "She always believed education should open doors rather than narrow options." Over the following weeks, we worked together to establish the Eleanor Henderson Scholarship for Innovation in Sustainable Agriculture. The act of collaborating on something meaningful began to heal wounds that simple financial restitution could never have touched. It created a shared purpose that acknowledged both the past hurt and the possibility of a different future. Standing together at the edge of the test field, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant gold, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with winning approval and everything to do with standing firmly in my own truth. "I never imagined this," Robert admitted, gesturing toward the thriving crops. "When you first talked about environmental science, I pictured something abstract, theoretical, not this practical innovation with tangible results." "You measured success by the standards you understood," I replied gently. "It limited your ability to see other forms of meaningful achievement." Carol slipped her arm through mine, a gesture of warm affection. "We're learning, Clara. We're finally learning." Ethan, perhaps changed the most visibly, had recently joined the board of a nonprofit focused on urban food security, bringing his financial expertise to an organization aligned with the values he had discovered through reconnecting with me. "You know what's ironic?" he asked as we walked back to the farmhouse. "Following the approved family plan was supposed to bring security and happiness, but I've never felt more fulfilled than since I started questioning it. Watching you build this life on your own terms gave me permission to examine my own choices. The greatest lesson wasn't that I had proven my parents wrong or that success had vindicated my choices. It was that defining success on my own terms, standing firmly in my truth even when it meant walking alone, had ultimately created the foundation for a life of integrity and purpose that no external validation could ever provide. The family I built in the end was imperfect, but it was honest, rooted in respect, and finally, truly happy.